In a few days, there'll be a conference being held in London by Joseph Atwill and Ken Humphreys on the theme that Jesus never existed. I'd like to respond to that charge with a few notes of my own. As a Christian pastor, I believe this needs to be balanced and refuted. Firstly, we know that already, lately, atheists like Joseph Atwill, Kenneth Humphreys, and even Richard Dawkins, who mentions in his book The God Delusion that a historical case could be made for Jesus never existing. And recently, these charges have become thick and fast, come toward us thick and fast. And so we need to look at the facts. And Atwill's believes that the Roman government made up the story of Jesus in order to pacify the Jews into submission sometime around 70 A.D. After the siege of Jerusalem, when the Romans came in and besieged and captured Jerusalem from the rebellious Jews. But let's look at some of the hard evidence for whether Jesus was a historical figure or not. Atwill and Humphreys say that there is no historical mark of evidence for Jesus, that he was simply a figment of the imagination of the Roman government. But is that true or not? If you think about it, first of all, early evidence for Jesus, written evidence, would have been scanty anyway. Who would have guessed that this little Palestinian sect was going to become a world religion? And so we don't have a lot of writings and evidence that come straight from the time that Jesus walked the earth, but we do have evidence soon after, when the religion started to become bigger. For instance, Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian in AD 115, wrote and mentioned about Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. Tacitus was a Roman historian, and he was writing around 115 AD, and he uses the word Christus, which back then meant Christ. It was a common misspelling of Christ, because there was a common name back then, Christus. Then there's a Jewish historian called Flavius Josephus, and he was a Jewish historian and writing in AD 66, which was only 30 years, or 32 or 33 years after Jesus died. He says this in a hotly contested quote: "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ." Then there's Lucian of Samosata, a satirist of the 2nd century, who writes about a man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. The new cult, of course, being Christianity. Another guy, a Roman historian named Suetonius, AD 120, mentions this: "As the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome." And then further on, he also writes, "Punishment by Nero was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition." So, as we can see, when you examine the evidence, there really is historical written evidence for a man named Jesus Christ. Pliny the Younger, in writing in 111 AD, wrote that the Christians used to sing early in the morning hymns to Jesus Christ as to a God, and bound themselves to a solemn oath not to do any wicked deeds, and to never to commit any fraud, theft, adultery, never to falsify their word, and not to deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. And that's Pliny the Younger, writing in 111 AD. So as we see, there's plenty of historical evidence for the existence of Jesus. F.F. Bruce, the Rylands Professor of Biblical Criticism and Exegesis at the University of Manchester, says some writers may toy with the fancy of a Christ myth, but they do not do so on the ground of historical evidence. The historicity of Christ is axiomatic for an unbiased historian, as the historicity of Julius Caesar is. It is not historians who propagate the Christ myth theories. That's F.F. Bruce. And then finally, Otto Betts concludes, no serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus. So I would just say to Mr. Humphreys and Mr. Atwill that we need to present the whole case, and it would seem to me that if this was a fabrication of the Roman government, I wonder why in the world would 11 of the 12 apostles have given their life for such a fable. Because 11 of the 12 apostles ended up dying. The apostle Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was killed by Nero. On and on, until 11 of the 12 apostles died for their belief in Jesus Christ. Now to me, that's no figment of anybody's imagination.